So moving on, next is a panel discussion, and it's my pleasure to invite Ravindran onto the stage. He's a professor at computer science, a Mindtree fellow, heads Robert Bosch Center for Data Science and AI, and, and CRI, which is Center for Responsible AI. He is an expert.
RBCDSAI and IIT Madras in general. So it's a great privilege to have you here on the panel. Next, I invite Harish Iyer, who is the Deputy Director of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And again, as I love to mention, he's an alumnus of IIT Madras as well. So we're always proud to welcome back our alumni. Okay. Next, I would like to invite Dr. Harpreet Singh. He's currently at the Bioinformatics Center at ICMR, and his current initiative is on ICMR Computational Genomics Center, and he has more than 15 plus years of experience handling and analyzing next generation sequence data. And also he has been leading multiple efforts from ICMR in terms of sharing high quality data and looking at standardization in healthcare technologies. Welcome, sir. And finally, I invite Dr. Doubleblind. So Dr. Doubleblind works with Google Health as a program manager. She's a physician with a degree in business management. Okay, we have been talking about physician scientists, and we have been talking about physician engineers. So it is a different combination. Thank you, Doubleblind, for being able to join us. She's working on a project to apply AI in imaging and diagnostics in real-world clinical settings. Right. So we have a pretty eclectic panel. We have multiple doctors, and we also have people who have been working in looking at policy and the ethics and other things in terms of AI and healthcare. So before we get started, I just wanted to have a quick 1 minute overview of what we really mean by responsible AI. Right. So responsible AI means a lot of things to different people. And in fact, at a very high level, it talks about all kinds of ways in which AI could have an impact on the human beings and on the society in which the AI is being deployed. The AI applications are being deployed, right? So we talk about how AI should be, transparent, how AI should be trustworthy, right? And how AI should, safeguard data. How AI systems, when you're building AI systems, how you have to worry about, privacy and anonymity and so on and so forth. And in addition, you also have to think about things like AI safety. Right. So how, what kind of performance guarantees are we offering when we deploy AI systems? So when we talk about responsibilities of AI, we have to worry about the entire gamut of these kinds of implications. And in particular, right, if you look at most of the guidelines that people have for responsible AI, it's at a very high level. And what we will try to attempt in this panel to understand how all of these at a very high level apply to healthcare in particular, and in the Indian context more specifically. So I'd like to start by inviting each of the panelists give like a short, maybe 2 to 3 minute statement on what they think is the implications of responsible AI in healthcare for India. So can we start with you, Harish? Well, you chose to sit at the end.
Okay, I sat at this end thinking I'll be the last. Clearly, I need AI to figure out where I should be sitting. So I think the Gates Foundation in general has been working towards the SDGs as its primary goals, and AI and digital tools are essentially an aim to achieve many of those goals. So I think it's very important that we remember that. I think one concern we have is, of course, the field moving so quickly on many of the dimensions that many people spoke about, but in particularly well laid out by Anurag. How do poorer countries, and within poorer countries, the poorer marginalized populations, how do they deal with AI is of deep importance to us from a funding perspective, from a programmatic perspective, and we're still trying to figure out how to do that. We recently had a Grand Challenges program on the use of AI in an equitable manner, where we invited, applications from all over the world, basically an open source kind of approach to innovate and where it can be used. And I think there were a bunch of different applications that came through, including healthcare, education, agriculture, all kinds of different things. Certainly, the aim of a lot of it, from our perspective, is to make sure, first of all, easy access to tools. Show if the tools are have utility. How do we access the tools? But very crucially, for what Ravi, you were talking about, how do you make sure it doesn't get exploited in the wrong way? And that is something that is very much a conversation, I think, that is still going on. And, the jury is still out in terms of how it will all play out. We had a conversation yesterday, personal conversation with you, and you were also saying, right, every day things seem to be changing. And even you, who is, academic expert in stuff, is saying, hey, even I'm learning new things all the time. So, you can imagine where many of the rest of us are. So anyway, I think I'll just start with laying the basic principles of responsibility, basically being to help marginalized folks to be able to do better and in their lives and move towards goals that are important globally. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ravindran. So if I required, it is absolutely, it is a future. But straight away, responsible AI, achieving responsible AI, what Dr. Professor Ravindran has just mentioned, transparency and other characteristics may not be possible immediately. What we need is both top-down and bottom-up approaches. It's not that it can start from bottom-up, developing policies and then programs and then chalking out very high-end programs. It is not going to solve the problem. It is just part of problem it will solve. But remaining part is bottom-up. We have to educate, we have to create a framework, we have to create structures for our doctors. There are a lot of data which is being generated by the doctors. So when I talk about data, Professor Anurag just mentioned about digital health ecosystem, data ecosystem. So there are essentially two components of digital health ecosystem, sir. Component is our services care and delivery component, which is pretty much, I can say, with the ABDM and other initiatives of the Government of India, pretty much structured. But the second component is digital health research data ecosystem. So research component is not that much structured, that much digitized. So we have to focus on that. And being from ICMR, it is responsibility of the ICMR to look at the digital health research data ecosystem component. And we have started working on it. We are collaborating with a number of institutes, IISc, Indian Institute of Science, taking lead in this area. We have started a program, ICMR, IISc, gold standard datasets. Because if you have worked with AI, one of the primary requirement is gold standard datasets, high quality, highly annotated, good quality datasets, and those datasets which are not going to change in over time, so that comparisons can be done with different algorithms. So we have started on that. And then another part of initiative that we are working in the policies in the public domain for comments is ICMR's policy on health research data management. There are policies on data sharing and access. There are policies on APIs and all. But this policy is a comprehensive piece of work that we have put up on internet for public comments. It looks at right from the planning to collection, management, storage, analysis, and then dissemination. So it is looking at the complete entire research data life cycle. So we'll be happy to have comments from this audience. So I'm putting up, it is available on ICMR website. So when I look at responsible AI, Professor Ravindran, it has to be both from the top down and the bottom up approach. And the effort has to be a collaborative effort. And as has been put by my DG in the first meeting that we had with him, he said that the mantra for success is collaboration, collaboration, and collaboration. So I think responsible AI we can reach only with collaboration, collaboration, and collaboration. Thank you.
So I'll talk about responsible AI from an ecosystem perspective. And I say that maybe because I come from Google. We've been working on AI machine learning for a few years now. We've been severely criticized when we started off initially. I think we've also learned from our mistakes. So when we develop AI models, we take responsibility, which includes accountability, inclusivity, transparency, privacy, security, very, very seriously. But in our experience of actually deploying AI models in real world settings, we've realized that responsibility does not solely lie with the AI model or the provider of the AI model. The responsibility has various components across the ecosystem as well. There are different stakeholders that will be working with your AI model during the testing stage, validation stage, actual deployment stage, and in troubleshooting stages as well. I think each stakeholder has a responsibility to work across the principles of privacy, security, and safety. And I think when we talk of responsible AI, we should be talking of roles across all of these stakeholders and ensuring that everyone is moving forward, keeping the safety of the end user in mind. In my experience of doing this for the last about 4 years now, we've been trying to deploy AI in real world settings. We've been doing a lot of research as well. Somehow when we talk of responsibility, it just stays with the AI provider. The rest of everyone else somehow I'm not saying they get away scot-free. It's just that the spotlight stays with the AI provider. But I think it would be like Dr. Harpreet was mentioning and Harish also mentioned, it's important to map out all possible stakeholders, including technicians, and ensure that they are trained in terms of what responsibility they owe when they're dealing with an artificial intelligence model. I think that will be possibly essential for us to actually deploy these AI models in real world settings. Else we will probably, I think in a few years, we'll still be talking about one thing.
Thank you, sir. For those of you who are not familiar with CMCVlor, we live in a small town about 150 kilometers away from here. And it is really a privilege to be here to share the podium with the stage with such eminent panel members today. And I thank Dr. Ravi for the opportunity. At the heart of all our efforts, I think we should keep the fact that the patient and the interest should be preserved. And this morning, as Dr. Shinjini was speaking about inviting our youngsters over here to visit our villages and see where 60% of the country lives, I think it's important to bring back into context that although we're talking at very advanced levels of technology, which possibly a lot of them cannot really interact and afford, we should always think about protecting the interests. And when people are not well and they come seeking for healthcare, there's another element of vulnerability which is added to this. So I think that at the heart of all this, we get the fact that we're talking about human beings who are in vulnerable positions. So that being said, I also want to add a bit of information that biomedical healthcare, which is what we're all talking about now, counts for a very small proportion of health. Maybe 5-10%. There are various studies which ascribe different proportions. The rest of it is so many determinants: where you're born, what genes you inherit, which environment you live in, what air you breathe, and what you eat and drink, and your microbiome, of course. And if there is an opportunity to use large-scale computing based on the large scale of data that we all generate and put out into the environment, I think it must be used. And we are completely supportive of that worldview as an institution and as an organization. However, we should also realize that healthcare systems are fraught, and what we're talking about, responsible AI over here, I think is very important. Nobody talked about responsible social media or responsible Twitter, which I think shows that there were consequences that we have learned from, and now we are coming back to say that we should develop frameworks. And I'm glad for that consciousness, because the one thing which was highlighted again across the panel here today is the pace of change is so rapid. And often healthcare sometimes seems to be the last domain to accept these kind of changes and move along with it.
It is because we are very averse to risk. And the larger the healthcare organization, the more averse to risk. And I think sometimes government is the largest healthcare provider organizations, which is most averse to risk. So we should be very cautious when you talk about large scales and things affecting large numbers of people. And also there are changing models. Today, I see many people who are ready to provide software for us. Traditionally, we had some 3 or 4 healthcare providers in terms of services or products or equipment. There might be a Philips or a Siemens or an Abbott. They'll come to you and tell you, we have this product and we'll think about it, do a few studies, validate it, and then take it in. Today, like every week, I get an offer saying that we can do this for your hospital, we can do this for your patients. Everybody with a computer access to the cloud can develop a new tool today. It's a new era. It's actually solutions being thrown at us. And we as a group of healthcare providers who are already overwhelmed with routine work now have to analyze something that we have little competence or very little knowledge about, and then accept it into our daily practice and use it for patient care. There are challenges to this because we deal with real human lives. So I'll stop over there. But we're very glad for this opportunity, and I'm glad that responsible AI is something that we're all talking about today.
Sure, great. So thank you everyone for those insightful comments. So I have a few questions that I would like to seed on, and then later we'll throw the floor open to the audience. So the first thing, I actually wanted to go back to Dr. Harpreet and then ask a little bit more about the gold standard data initiative, right? So in some sense, the notion of responsibility in AI starts from the data itself, right? And so are you actually looking at this, and I mean, what kind of regulations you have in place for while you are building this gold standard data set in terms of looking at?
Yeah, thank you, Professor Ravindran. So the thing is, this gold standard data sets, you rightly said, if you have, if you want to build an artificial intelligence application for health, there are 2 components. One is the software, second is the data. So data component is very important. If you don't have good data, any good application is not going to give good results. So what we realized that data, most of these applications are developed using data collected from collaborations, small collaboration with a doctor, and then he has a couple of images and develop an AI algorithm. So AI algorithms developed by 2 researchers cannot be compared. And then second thing is the biasness in the data. So algorithms developed using biased data may also be a problem. Third is the annotations, quality of annotations. That is, all these factors are going to create problems for the developed AI. So what we thought, and we had a number of meetings with the folks from ISC and ArtPark, which is a Section 8 company in the IIC. So we thought that let's create standard data sets. We call it gold standard data sets, but those are standard data sets with standard set of specifications, standard annotations, so that those data sets remain as version 1. If we release a version 1 of the data set, it will remain as version 1. So anyone who wants to develop, say for chest TB X-ray algorithms, they can use that, and then other person who is going to develop can develop the same algorithm, can compare the efficacy. Second thing is, if some companies like Dr. was saying that there are a lot of companies who are throwing AI algorithms to us. So if any company is developing an algorithm, say I'll give you example of only chest TB X-ray. If somebody has developed an algorithm and they want to put it in CMC, so there is no way CMC can find out the efficacy of those algorithms compared to what is already there in India. So with this kind of nationally representative data sets, gold standard data sets, that is also possible. So what we have started is developing a collaborative hub and spoke model, where different hubs we have selected on thematic areas like oral cancer, chest TB X-rays, and very recently we are going to start on leprosy, because that is also one of the very big disease. In fact, Google has developed a very nice algorithm using data from Brazil. So that paper is published. So what we are interested in trying to develop that same algorithm for Indian conditions. So because from the lesions itself, if one can predict whether this lesion is leprosious lesion or not. So for that, we are going to collaborate with the National Leprosy Eradication Program. And then there are many other diseases on which we are starting. 6 we have initially thought of. and 4 we have already started, 2 are in the pipeline. So this is something that is going to build, kind of lay the foundations of a better AI models, comparable AI models, I would say. And then if I put it up to responsible AI models. Yeah.
Thank you. So, Dr. Devlin, if I can just follow up on that question, right? So, in one of the things that even Dr. Anurag was mentioning earlier is about the diversity in India. So, when we are building these kinds of gold standard data sets, right? So, are we really taking care of the diversity of the population? I know that Google has been doing a lot of this data set gathering, so that's why I'm putting you on the spot.
So when we build data models, we try and work with whatever the gold standard medical guidelines are. So for example, if we were to build an AI model on skin diseases, we would work with gold standard data guidelines on how skin is classified globally. And then we start to figure out where we can get those data sets from. And it's a global exercise for us, and not an easy one, I must say. When we did our first AI model on diabetic retinopathy, we procured data sets of fundus images from India, Japan, the US, Mexico, trying to make sure that the diversity was represented in the test model and a similar diversity was represented when we were validating the model. So our biggest challenge, and one of the reasons why we now have possibly taken a step back from regulated medical devices, is access to an end-to-end diversity of data sets, which kind of brings me to the point which I think has already been referred to during the day, that the NHS, for example, has open source data sets available, as does Japan, as does Singapore. But in India, it's even the organizations that claim to have annotated data sets, we've tried to work with them, and the quality of data is not to that level. So hopefully once we have the gold standard data sets available, that problem will be solved and we'll have more AI models coming in from itself.
So one of the things that I noticed when you talked about diversity, you're talking about Mexico bringing data from multiple countries. Do we have a recommendation of how diverse the sample should be for India? India is a microcosm, so do we?
Can't answer that question offhand, but I remember looking at some data earlier. Sometimes when we do studies in CMC, we find that we have patients from all the states, and then sometimes we're looking for specific homogenized factors which we can't identify. So in a certain sense, perhaps large referral hospitals will reflect the diversity of the country, but I do not know how. Perhaps Dr. Anurag wants to comment on how to account for or Harpreet.
I'll go with what you said, sir. There is no as such, offhand answer for that. But what we think is that diversity is good, but not, you have been working in AI for a long time. It's not that every diversity is good. Sometimes, you have to curtail the diversity to get good results. So this is something that we have to trade off between efficient AI model and the diversity. So this is, something that we have to figure out. Yeah.
Sure. So let's change tacks a little bit. I have a slightly different question, right? So we always talk about, informed consent and making sure that people understand what the data is being used for. So in the Indian context, right? I mean, people literacy levels are not really very high, right? So what is informed consent for India, right? Does it even make sense? Should we talk about some other version of informed consent in India? So I'm going to.
We talked yesterday about Digiyatra, where Digiyatra data goes. So I think it's even a highly educated, quote unquote, educated people probably don't understand it. And Anurag said it better than any of us, saying in a microsecond, he says, yes, agree to whatever the pages and pages of text.
And we also know that we're talking about a small fraction of the Indian population anyway, even
that small small fraction. But I think on top of that, healthcare and medicine brings much more power asymmetry and complexity, right? We are used to a doctor says something, and we are used to most people, maybe not everybody in this room, but certainly most people in the country trust their doctors significantly. So if doctor says, hey, I think you should do this, very likely they will give consent and informed both ways, as Anurag again clearly pointed out, that it should be explained in when you do clinical trials. So I've been involved in many clinical trials. Their informed consent is very, very, very important, but even there, it is a huge struggle to explain in simple language complicated protocols. Not technical language, but simple language, right? If I say I want to take out a sample to measure T cell, some function, how do you explain that in a simple language? I'm guessing TB research can't be very easy to do. It's a very common disease of the poor. We don't understand exactly how these vaccines work even. But imagine in a clinical trial, which is the most controlled setting, governed under, whole lot of laws, Helsinki Declaration, etc., etc. There itself, it's been a struggle. So in general, I think in medicine, I would say clinical medicine, informed consent has been a very difficult thing because of power asymmetry. I think what happens when you add AI on top of it, an algorithm says something. Again, I'm assuming this is what you mean, Ravi, when you ask this question. If you say algorithm says, do this, this is the prediction for you if you give me all this data.
That was my next question, but anyway, go on.
Okay, that is part of the problem. But I think even sharing your data, maybe you were referring to sharing one's own data. We certainly give consent to a whole lot of things to, all the big tech platforms, including Google, right? We just say, okay, we don't know what you're going to do with this data. We have no idea, but we accept it. Same thing I would say for government platforms. Right? Government platforms take a lot of data. We talked about Digiyatra. I think Digiyatra is a government platform, but I'm not even sure, to be honest with you. So I'm saying, but we don't really know. It's convenience. We use it for convenience. I think in healthcare, if you're a healthy person donating data, giving up data, that's one set of risks into informed consent. Certainly, if you're not well and you're relying on a machine to interpret something or, do something for you, I guess it is a complex thing. So, I'm not saying it does not mean informed consent is not important. I'm saying it is a difficult thing.
No. Can I kind of slightly, shape that, right? We understand it's a very difficult question, right? But then we talk about regulations already, right? So in fact, it was pointed out by, again, we keep quoting you every other sentence and we should be here. So anyway, pointed out by Anurag, in the data protection law, right? We talk about informed consent already. So what does it mean from a regulatory point of view? What should we describe as informed consent when we are going to talk about the population who probably don't understand much of this anyway? So any thoughts on that? Any of you?
I'll start by sharing a true incident. It's, you might all laugh, but it actually happened to us. So all of you would know Google has an AI that helps to grade diabetic retinopathy. It's a certified medical device, certified, CDSO certified, everything. So it's like a medical device, right? We've deployed it across the country, and there were a few sites where the number of people screened per day was just not picking up. And we knew the footfall of that particular center was high enough. So we, as is practice, we went back to the drawing board and we started to actually see what could be the issue. And we did everything possible, which was retrain the technician, do the registration a little bit differently, everything. And the end result of that entire exercise was that people refused to sign the consent form. And the consent form is literally, it's a white paper with 6 lines, 3 options, and they were just supposed to select one and sign it. And this was not just, it was not a regional piece. This is something which is prevalent everywhere. And we have had feedback come to us where people are doing community screening and these are like pure play diabetic retinopathy camps, and they've come up to us and said, you need to remove this consent part of the workflow. And I mean, if I were to go and say this back to my global team, they'd be aghast. Like, are you crazy? This is like a lawsuit waiting to happen. So, and then this whole piece with ABDM happened, where there's a consent manager being proposed and all of that. So the piece that we think could work, and we don't know, we're also in the process of testing it out, is number one, anything that comes from the physician, people sit and listen. If it comes from a technician, it won't work. Second, if it's in a local language, amazing, because anything in an English or a Hindi will not work. It has to be in the local language. Third, it has to be video based. You put it on a video, share the link while they're sitting outside in the waiting room, let them open the link on their phones, and the consent start to flow. So it's not so much about, and the end goal of all of this for us actually worked out to be user education. People need to learn what consent is. They need to know what all they can control themselves. And only then will something like this actually fly. Because otherwise it ends up being such a massive roadblock when it comes to implementation. And it takes me back to my medical college days. I was a very pathetic intern the surgeon would do all the workup, right? And ultimately on the day of the procedure, he would send me with this file, कि तुम लड़की हो, तुम्हारी बात सुनेगा. And I'm from Punjab, right? So I did my training in Chandigarh. And for folks who don't understand Punjabi, my surgeon, the consultant would say, Punjabi jaake boli, onu jada samajh aayega. Meaning, you speak in Punjabi, the patient will understand better. So I think all of these things have been around. Honestly, I think we need to learn how to get consent from physicians and nurses who get it done all the time.
So, little bit technical stuff here, because I come from an organization which has developed this national ethics guidelines, and then recently AI ethical guidelines for AI applications. So I can tell you, AI, this artificial intelligence, the spectrum of use of artificial intelligence application is very vast, from screening to intervention. Right now, intervention you just mentioned about. So there are more interventions, AI-based interventions that are going to happen. So considering this vast spectrum, looking at one kind of consent may not be, justified. So if you go by this ethical guidelines, national ethical guidelines, there is a table mentioned there, 4 types of harms which any not just AI, any intervention or any screening, if it does, what kind of waiver or what kind of ethical consent needs to be taken. So I looked at it and I found that if I try to match this screening AI, it matches with the first very minimal harm. So there the clauses say that we don't have to take ethical consent. So this is something that I would like to put up here, because if we want to use AI, we have to consider the spectrum of AI applications as well. Yes. You were saying? Yes.
Sure, we'll come to you. Yeah, sure. Okay. So this is, since Harish already brought it up, so I'm going to ask this other question. No, I'm going to ask other people because he knows what the question is. So, I mean, you're a clinician, right? So you see patients on a regular basis. What is your opinion on whether you have to disclose if AI was involved in decision making to the patient or not? What is the level of transparency you think is even needed nowadays? Would patients care?
Okay, first disclosure, I work in transfusion medicine and pathology lab, so I get to see a limited set of patients. or they're already on an autopsy stage. So that's the difference. I need somebody else's consent for that. But jokes aside, I think patients need to know when we use an AI to support our diagnosis. And I think it's a routine part of disclosure. So if you do a blood test and you're trying to explain to them that this blood test will tell us things, then we have to tell them that this is why I'm collecting your blood. We do this extensive evaluation of patients with bleeding disorders. Once we collect the blood, we do 15, maybe 20 tests on them before we kind of create a composite report in the evening. So we have to explain to them that we're going to collect blood, we're going to do some tests which will look at why you are bleeding. And then we might come back for more sample later, or we might send you off without any additional testing. So it is important for patients to know. It is also more important for us as clinicians to understand. Sometimes the black box model of AI does not even make it explicit to us as to what is happening inside the box. And then beyond us, the regulators. How will the regulator license a product in which the regulator is not privy to how the workflow happens? Traditionally, we know how a creatinine is determined. There's a biochemical test, you add some reagents, you get a color reaction, you have a standard curve, and you know the concentration of creatinine is so much because the standard graph gives you an output in that. But today I have no idea how the algorithm made its decision, whether it was right, and now we've heard all the variables from the selection of the subjects for the study to avoid bias in the study. So how do I know all this and how do I explain it to the patient? It is essential, but how we're going to do it, well, we have to educate ourselves about it.
So I think AI is not here to replace humans. It's only here to facilitate processes, make things more efficient. If you're not transparent, then I don't think that people who need to intervene when the AI is not performing to its capability will not know what to do. So I think the transparency is very important. Also, I think in this day and age of litigation, it is very essential to be transparent with your patients of what exactly is happening and why it's happening. Else, I think the room for error just becomes so high, and the risk that is involved in a human life it's just unthinkable if you're not transparent.
No. So let me. I'm playing devil's advocate, obviously, as you'll always say. So you're talking about blood tests you're running. You're not going to tell your patient what reagent you are adding to that, right? So you only are going to tell them this is what I'm going to use the outcome for. So why do you need to tell them that you are using an AI? Right? As long as you're telling them, I mean, you need to know what AI is used. I agree with that. I'm talking about the transparency at the patient level. Right? So how much does the patient really need to know? Anyone?
I think I'm thinking back to this big health event we had recently called COVID, where people got vaccinated. And I think it was not easy to explain. I mean, I know that I found it very difficult to explain to family members, relatives, truly the risks, benefits of something like a vaccination, right? Rare events, etc., etc. In fact, some vaccines got underused. So I'm saying the risk, because there also it's an informed, I mean, the vaccination is supposed to be informed consent, I assume, right? So I think this is, but I think it is, there is a balance to be drawn. I don't know how easy it is to draw it. We will have to think about it carefully. Major, really complex algorithms, if they come up eventually, you know, doing n-dimensional analysis of, let's say, a risk, or we were talking yesterday about a physician who suggested I should take a statin, right? Whereas my cholesterol is fine. But they said, no, statin still reduces heart risk. So is that true? I have no idea. So you have to sort of go, I'm not so very well informed, but I'm saying, yes, I will do it because I respect your power. So I'm saying it is a complicated question. Maybe I will stop there.
So I'll add to what Harish just mentioned. So this document is available on the internet. INSA coordinated a meeting on data sharing, Indian National Science Academy. And everyone on the table was saying, yes, we should do data sharing, we should do. And you can find in this document on the internet. Sharing should not be just open. It has to be controlled sharing. So what we coined in our policy term is responsible data sharing, which at times I find difficult to explain. Data sharing versus responsible data sharing. So similar concept exists here, explaining and responsible transparency and responsible transparency. Because anyway, full transparency also has a risk associated with it. If you completely expose everything, then it can be used for harm. So sharing, responsible sharing, and transparency and responsible transparency.
Add a comment, because one of the things that people, if I compare it to an analog world where we usually live in, and the traditional methodologies that we've adapted have come through decades of learning, and we have a certain system of how that knowledge was generated and transferred. Now we've come up with a challenging situation where the transformer does something and then spits out results which sound very cogent and logical. It's like using ChatGPT to write up a story and send it for, all these stories we've been reading recently of award-winning paintings and generative AI, which is creating new content. So should we disclose that we use AI to generate that content? Of course, we should disclose that. Should somebody interacting with a voice on a phone line know whether it is AI which is speaking to them, yes or no? I would think yes. So I think it's obligatory that we disclose when we use AI, because it is a completely different paradigm that we are dealing with. It's not the traditional. We have to forget that we are dealing with flesh and blood and human beings who make choice, when non-sentient products start talking to us and make decisions for us in future.
Okay, I mean, I can keep debating that point, but in the interest of time, I'm to throw the floor open for questions. And I think we already have Shinjini who reserved her first question. So.
But I think what is very important is never to underestimate your participant. It doesn't matter what level of literacy they have. They will understand if they have to understand. It's how much you can explain to them. And I think it's important that they are explained what's happening. It's our moral responsibility to do so. So one of the things that you said about, they read and and the participation information sheet is a very strong tool, which I feel we really need to develop, and in languages that they are familiar and comfortable with, and in very simple languages. The problem is our information sheets are really complicated. So trying to explain AI to them is going to be more complicated. So that is the other problem. I had a question for the panel, is that when you're dealing with AI, we have personal experience now of identifying presented. He's picked up, let's say, some intracranial structures which are looking different in the fetal head. What is it that you go back and tell the participant, right? I don't know what those structures are saying. We may develop some further algorithms from them. Are we reconsenting them? Are we going back for further discussion with them? I don't know. We don't have an answer yet because it's a new area, but be happy to hear from any of you what you feel.
So, actually, ma'am, this is AI-based interpretations is not a very old area. It's a very recent thing that is happening. So the guidelines and all I have gone through thoroughly. It doesn't touch on these aspects. It says very, I would say, superficially. It talks about, gives hints about it, but there is no precise definitions what has to be interpreted, how it has to be interpreted, what is the ethical implications of that. So there is no, I could not find, maybe some expert, because this is not, ethics is not my domain, but I could not find it. Yes, please.
So I'm abusing my privilege of sitting here. So I mean, think of any other kind of double-blind drug study or some other thing that people would do, right? Suppose in the course of the analysis you find somebody in the control group has a particular condition, right? Would you actually then pull them out and put them on the drug or not? I mean, this is a very similar question to what she's asking, right? So in the AI data gathering, you have found some artifact. You go back and tell them about it. But shouldn't similar regulations apply here? I don't know. That's what
I think we should take comments from Dr. Anurag. He's the right person.
So there is such a common problem in genomics that we have written on the consent form. If we were to find something, would you want to know? Would you not want to know? So in fact, our consent always includes that, because you will find lots of stuff and we struggle with it. For example, many neurodegenerative diseases. I'm struggling with it right now. Within a particular family that I know, somebody has ND, they have a daughter is married, they will probably have a kid soon. Do I ask for the daughter to get tested, knowing the mother has it? If she does, well, that's 30 years of waiting for it to start. But if I don't, then, well, there's a possibility of a stoppable transmission to a child that I've not done. And when I asked an ethicist, the question was very simple. Is this a variable penetrance disease? Is this a guaranteed penetrance disease? And take your decision that way. And this is when there is no form for me to worry about. There's somebody who is relying on my decision. In forms, we try to get away from this responsibility by passing it to them. And which is why I said, predicting anything about the future is like rowing a boat. You're looking backwards while moving forwards. Very similarly, all guidelines are written based on past experiences, past things. And to use guidelines to solve the decision making for the future is a legal protection that nobody can hold you accountable. It is not in itself a guarantee that you're doing the right thing. And I think that is, since I have the mic, I'll say one other thing. You asked about when you should inform whether you used an AI. My general feeling on the matter is very simple. When you use the AI to do a task that the patient would reasonably assume was done by a human being, you have to disclose. When you use the AI to do a task that even no human being can do, from sharpening images to calculating the genome sequence to 100 other things, there is absolutely no reason for them to be discussed, because it is just like what you discussed, right? I mean, how do you measure creatinine? You never tell it. So when it is part of a workflow, not substituting what normally a human would do, you won't. But also when it becomes part of standard of care. Let's say one day TB slides are made by humans. Now I bought a machine. Now the machine makes the slides. Obviously, in fact, I'll advertise. I'm doing it in an automated way. So I think responsibility kind of ends there without writing it down. Your point, right? Incidental. No, I think estimation of a participant should not be linked to their education, social or economic level. Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely fine. But I think the question was somewhat different on that one.
Sorry.
We are having a cross discussion. Back to you guys. I have to do a call in 5 minutes.
No. I have to be very clear that I was being a very good moderator. I was not putting out any of my opinions here. So I don't land on either side of the debate, right? I'm still trying to figure out what the answer is. I kind of agree with what he says. I certainly don't want to underrate people's sentiments. Sure. Dr. Balu? Can you? Oh, God. All the mics came back up.
I think part of my question is already answered, but I'll still go ahead with it. So you mentioned that AI is facilitatory to human, which in case is the physician who's going to probably use the tool. In a scenario where I've been treating head and neck cancer for now 20 years, so I have a patient and I have a new AI tool which has come to my clinic saying this patient needs radiation, but my intuition and my experience tells me that no, I don't think he will make it. I don't want to give it to you. Then the patient will say, okay, you ask the patient to make the choice. Patient will say, doctor, you are the best judge. Why don't you make the choice? If I'm going to make a choice based on AI, the responsibility is still on me. And if I am going to make the choice based on my own experience, it will still be mine. Okay, so AI can be frustrating also, not only facilitatory. So in this scenario, what I wish to know is are these AI models which are being deployed, is it mandatory for them to continue to learn from me or from the deployment? Are you doing that? And are you continuing to follow through with your deployment? I mean, what are the results? Have they predicted correctly or have they done wrong? Like phase 4 in clinical trials.
So there are different kinds of AI models. There are some that, so we call them supervised and unsupervised AI models. So some of the AI models will learn as they go. I would say I don't want to call it the gold standard, but in terms of good practice, those AI models should not ideally be relied upon 100%. Then there are AI models which have reached a certain, I would say, I don't want to call it maximum performance level, but they've reached a certain standard of performance. And anything over and above is just a plus. Those AI models, when they are deployed, are not learning. Any new version that you get of that particular AI model will be given to you by the manufacturer only post-market, only after they've done something that they call as post-market analysis. So when the AI model has reached a certain level of performance and it's actually deployed in real-world clinical settings and it's not learning as it goes, it is CE says that you're supposed to do something called as post-market monitoring, in which a certain random set of data is taken and you then reanalyze how the model is performing. So in a situation like that, there are certain parameters which are defined as red flags. If the model is not performing as it's supposed to, it's the responsibility of the manufacturer to inform the physician. Most AI models today that would be deployed, especially the ones that are in research or the ones that are still being tested, would be learning as they go. So there, I don't think that they're very reliable. But if there's a model which is, like I said, a CE certified model or a CDSCO certified model, or even for that matter, an FDA certified model, those are the ones that can be relied upon. And if you were to speak with physicians who've been working these certified models, they will come back and tell you the same thing, that relying on the model has not let them down. I would say in about 99% of the cases. 1%, yes, which is why I always say the AI is not there to replace the physician. It's only there to facilitate and make processes more efficient.
Thank you.
I just want to add a comment to the consent part of it. There are some clear boundaries. One is if you're doing research, then there is an opportunity to talk to the person, subject, explain this. But if you're sitting in an OPD where sometimes you're seeing 40 patients a day, or some places in government facilities, maybe even more, how do you get that consent by collecting all this information, then get the consent and tell them at some future date, I'm going to take your data and use it for making a computer program which will help us at another distant future in time. So it becomes a little tricky, when we are going to move the goalposts a little further and a little further. Although we've said that de-identified data then can be used, do we have an obligation still to inform the patient later? We have data going back 20 years which has been digitized. We are going through these arguments internally to see how can we take out the data and convert it to useful.
So, in the interest of time, so we'll have to bring the panel to conclusion. It's been very interesting discussions that are going on. I believe we can continue debating this for maybe a couple of hours and still not come to a conclusion. So it really tells us that this whole notion of responsible AI is a complex field, especially so when it comes to healthcare. It's doubly complex, and there's a lot of debate that needs to happen, and all of us should basically get involved and work on this. And I can thank the panelists for very enlightening and lively discussion. Thank you.